My name is Marcia Perez. I am the chair of the Racial Equity Subcommittee. Thank you all for being here. If others want to enter, if other PCCEP members, can you please introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Ann Campbell, PCCEP member.
Lakiana, alternate co-chair, PCCEP member.
Hope I see Ann just joined us. Ann, do you want to introduce yourself? Sorry to put you on the spot. Or
I already
Ann,
did.
sorry, Amy.
Oh,
Amy, sorry. I was looking at your name and looking at, oh yeah, it's been a long day.
Whoa,
Marcia,
you're
that's
telling
the first
me.
time that's happened.
Yeah, hello everybody. Amy Anderson here, chair of the Behavioral Health Subcommittee.
All right, so I'm gonna just briefly go over the agenda. So tonight we're just gonna debrief our last meeting, which was held on January 21st. We hosted a spotlight with the Latino community, and we got a lot of good feedback on that. We had a pretty good attendance. I can't remember the number of people that were there. I think it was nearly like 50 plus people. We had some really great feedback related to just thoughts and concerns around community safety and community policing, and just I felt like we got a really good overview of like what the community wants with policing. And one of the things I heard was the need and want for more presence of law enforcement and folks from the mayor's office, particularly the mayor. Do others want to chime in? I didn't take a lot of notes.
Kill the niggers, kill the niggers, kill the niggers, kill the niggers.
Wow. Sorry about that. Hopefully we can mitigate some of that.
I could add to that if you'd like. Some things that I heard specifically was the possibility of opening community centers for youth in their communities.
Do others have any recaps that they want to add on here for that event? I just want to say that one of the action items that we did as a result after we debriefed after the meeting, what we did is requested a work session with the mayor, the chief of police, and Commissioner Hardesty, and Lakiana and I both met with them, and so we'll talk a little. That's our next agenda item, and we'll jump right into that. And we met with them last Friday, right? Last Friday, and I thought it was a really great meeting. I think it really provided some good opportunities for us to get some feedback and to give some feedback related to how we want to conduct these meetings and increase presence by both city and PPB officials. And it was important for me to make sure that we had a kind of a loop back, like feedback, to make sure that we're intentional about the space that we're holding for communities to come forward. Oh, sorry, my pizza's done. Lakiana, do you want to recap really quick, just like the email that you sent? And I'm going to step away for just 1 second so my house doesn't burn down.
Yeah, let me pull that email up. Sorry, give me a second, y'all. I'm just going to go off because I don't have that email right in front of me right now, but it was just really productive in the sense of being able to establish kind of an understanding of what PCCEP needs in order to be successful. One of the biggest things that we took away was a community feedback form that would fill law enforcement or public officials. We having fun today.
I'm sorry about that all.
It's all from the iPhone 8s is my guess.
Yeah.
They're changing their names. It looks like we have, I'm sorry, keep going. I'm sorry, apologies.
You have another iPhone in here though. I'd probably kick it out before you get going. Cool. So what, with that meeting that we had 3 frontline Black community activists, and it's part of a reoccurring thing that PCCEP does is bringing in community voice. And one of the major concerns that we brought up was just how do we make sure that that voice is acknowledged by elected officials? Thank you, Lucinda. How we acknowledge what was said by elected officials to be able to acknowledge what was said in meetings. And so Mayor Wheeler had listed off like several, he had this like framework that I felt was really, could be a standard for it. And so what we will utilize this forum to do is that anytime that there is like public testimony or like a panel discussion, that we could send this form along with the video or link to what was said, and that we could get feedback from either PPB or the mayor, depending on what the topic was on, to kind of allow them to respond to what was said. Because what we don't want to have happen is for feedback to just continue to be shared and falling on deaf ears. So Asana just sent me the emails again, it's buried in all my stuff. So here's some of the action items we took away from the work session. And Asana, thank you for sharing that with me. So a diversified staff attendance to PCCEP meetings from PPB, which we met with Assistant Chief Deputy Chief Chris Davis, who's on the call this evening. And so basically, instead of sending the same couple of staff to PCCEP meetings, we're asking that they increase attendance of staff, particularly for those who specialized roles. Like, for example, at last month's meeting when we had the Latino meeting with the Latino community, like an advisor or a liaison that specifically works with Latino communities. I can't 100% verify, maybe Amy, you can speak to this, but I know that at the behavioral health meetings that I've heard that there are attendance of folks from the behavioral health units of PPB. So that's an example of kind of more of what we would like to see in that respect. Like I said, I'm gonna draft up the community voice feedback form, which would be sent to anytime a public meeting was had. Some of the questions that would be included would be, what did you hear? What did you learn? What do you acknowledge? Action steps that will be taken afterwards. So that will help us feel more, just grounded in the fact that what is being shared is actually being received. Continued communication and engagement with Mayor Wheeler, Chief Lavelle, PPB staff, and City Council. I'll say over the last month, we've had some of the best communication that PCCEP has ever had, and I get this feeling that we're finally scratching the surface, and I hope it's not like one of those, like we're always going to get those kind of feelings, but like we're actually really are getting to the meat of the work. But just been very encouraged by what we've had as far as engagement and understanding. And then the last piece of that is that PCCEP and PPB will work on their relationship. There were just comments about PPB feeling that PCCEP was adversarial in some ways. And I'm not sure if we're going to go into that meeting right now, but we'll talk about it at some point tonight. We are taking some steps to have better understanding with PPB, and just also shared our own frustration with that label, because PCCEP is not an adversarial group. I run a nonprofit that works with law enforcement. We have multiple members of PCCEP that do great engagement with PPB. So that's a frustrating thing, and it's a balance, right? PCCEP takes pride in being a committee that's not just, we're going to get to real issues, and we take pride that we do that. And so, and we don't work on a committee that is handing out stickers. We're based out of a settlement agreement. So the feedback that we're going to be giving is probably going to be tough, but it comes from a place of wanting real change. Like, we don't get up here just to like throw shade or make things challenging for PPB. Like, we really want to change the culture of how they engage and how they serve the community. So I just kind of stumbled through that, but that's basically the 4 things that came out of that, and also kind of bleeds into another meeting that we just had this week, which I also thought was fantastic. But I'll turn it back over to Marcia because I want to stay on the agenda.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think that covered most of it. I also felt like that was a really good follow-up and just a solid action item that we can bring back to community for communities that are on here tonight that participated in last month's meeting. I felt like this was a good way to say, like, okay, we are bringing this stuff to the, our concerns up forward and developing a plan to respond so that those voices don't go unheard, and also creating opportunities to work more collaboratively with the Bureau and other city staff. The other thing I'll add to that is, on top of the meeting that we had this week, we came up with yet another opportunity to connect with PPB. And then on top of that, I also presented a brief overview of PCCEP and the Racial Equity Subcommittee at the Latino Advisory Council meeting last night, and I thought it went excellent. One thing that I'll just note is, due to there was an incident over the weekend with a man from the Latino community who unfortunately went over the 205 bridge and passed away. And that was an opportunity. I was able to connect with the Latino Advisory Council, who was able to connect with PPB to make sure that there was a good connection with the family in this. And so, like, to me, that was a brilliant example of how we should all be working together as community to build trust with police and community. And so for anyone who who participated in that process, I just want to thank you all. It was a really tragic event that happened, but that's a really great way of how we want to, like, how we see ourselves working together, like, in a community setting. So I hope to continue to do that. And then, based on kind of that report out, I'd like to take the next few minutes to just hear from folks in the community or others who have any feedback or questions related to that that work session and outcomes that came from that.
Marcia, when
Yes.
you say work session, what are you talking about specifically?
Yeah, so I sent out an email to PCCEP members. So I requested a meeting. So after the Latino spotlight, after the last racial equity subcommittee last month, I sent out an email just requesting, actually, I think we sent it out after the December meeting, requesting a work session with the mayor's office after we had both Portland Police and the Black activist panel in December, and we wanted to debrief that with the mayor's office, chief of police, and Commissioner Hardesty, since Hardesty was present. And so I thought it was important to just wrap back around to make sure that they were aware, and that also we can get some accountability on their end of, like, they're hearing what the community, we're convening and we're getting community voices here. What are they going to do with it, type of thing. So that's what we're talking about. So we just had that meeting last Friday, I think.
Just to be clear, there's two there was one work session and then another, our other, what's that? Was the work
Okay,
session
work
last-
session.
Say this just to put it on the record or whatever. The incident where the guy went over the bridge, which is tragic as hell. And if somebody hadn't seen that happen, it's really hard to say, but I'm really glad you helped bridge the you know, the group between the divide between the family and law enforcement, basically to keep them looking, is more or less, it seems that's what happened, which is good. And it was, I want to just point out that it wasn't just Portland PB. It
Right.
was an interagency deal that led to the final, I don't know, what do you want to say? The truth about what happened. They found, you know.
Well, I mean, I just wanted to acknowledge that as an example of how the groups can work together. I don't want to get into all the weeds of that case.
No,
But it was a very tragic incident that happened. So I appreciate you acknowledging that, Barb. And there were other law enforcement agencies that were involved, including the Sheriff's Department and Vancouver. So do others have thoughts about that or want clarification related to the work session?
Is it, I had one question, and I think you talked about it previously, but are you going to have follow-up sessions? Is there a plan to meet like quarterly or?
Yeah,
Is there-
we haven't really developed the plan just yet. Lakiana mentioned the proposed like feedback form so that we can make sure that they're watching and they have feedback as well for us. But the next steps that we've developed is just making more intentional connections with Deputy Chief Davis, and we'll be developing some steps to work internally with PPB before we have these public meetings. But that's, I think we're just taking some extra steps in between to make sure we can make those connections and build those relationships that like we haven't in the past.
Sounds good.
Any other thoughts or comments related to the work session? All right, so we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is getting feedback and proposing different frameworks for this group in particular. So what we've been doing every month is kind of hosting a specific topic, and we proposed giving the spotlight to different communities every month. After the last 2 months and needing to kind of coordinate all the feedback to get a meaningful response, I wanted to step back. We were going to focus on a specific community this month, but I thought it was important to acknowledge the capacity that we're at and also just take a little pause and come back to the drawing board to get some feedback related to like what's tangible, because there's a lot of work that goes into those. And it feels like, in my opinion, that maybe we should spread it out. Like every month is a lot to plan for that. And then to get meaningful feedback in response. It's like, as the chair, I like yesterday I had like 3 PCCEP meetings, related meetings. I'm on a PCCEP related planning call every day at this point. And so to make these, larger meetings successful. And so I'm curious what people might propose as an alternative that would both bring the community together, get PPB input, and also, continue to uplift the voices of the community while also getting feedback from the city and PPB. So Lakiana, you also had a suggestion. So I wanted to.
Yeah. So basically, as Missy was saying, we last month we had come up with this idea to have a community space at each of our meetings, and then from that it kind of bloomed into an entire session just on the issues of the Latino community. And I think that there is space for those kind of meetings. But what I had originally thought was like at each racial equity subcommittee meeting, that there would be like basically a soapbox for like one speaker to be able to of a different community of color each month to kind of speak on some law enforcement related issue. Not that we would like then dive into it, but just like create a space where someone could kind of like raise an issue or bring something to the table that's going on. And so that was one idea we had. And then the other idea was, or have, instead of having one speaker, which might be hard, like, right, like, okay, we want to invite a Native American speaker in this month. It's like, there's so many different people and groups. Like, how do we select one? We could do like a panel as if we did last month, but as Marcia was saying, that's not feasible each month. So we were just trying to see, like, we wanted to hear from you all, you know, what are your thoughts on creating sustained community voice in here? Because I think if we have that, like a space blocked out in each meeting, then we invite more people in and allow more people to get to know our work, right? And it's like, oh, like that particular speaker will then draw in other people from the group that they represent. So we were just like, instead of making a decision by ourselves, we just kind of wanted to throw it out to everyone to see, what are y'all's thoughts on a community space at each meeting that isn't necessarily the only part of the agenda, right? Like it could just, like I said, just be like a platform within our meeting to share something and to generate some dialogue without necessarily taking over or being the entire meeting. So yeah, that's what I'd add to it.
I think it's a great idea.
Which one? We
Yeah,
have
there
like
are two ideas.
basically there's two models, the full meeting as a thing, or like maybe full or half of like a panel of speakers, or like one speaker for a shorter kind of amount of time, like just like a quick kind of
A recap.
Yeah.
I like the panel, and however, I do know that that requires additional work to facilitate that. But I like that, and the whole meeting with the panel speaking, I think is really great.
As we're processing this, I was thinking, I wonder if we did want to do the framework that Lakiana poses, which is like having one person represented from a certain community. I wonder if that's another opportunity to further bridge the connection with the existing advisory councils. So bringing, the chair of the African American Advisory Council to come speak on things that they're working on, and that way we're elevating their work, and we're joining together and hearing from what they're hearing in their community. And we could do the same with the Slavic and Muslim Advisory Council, and that could be one person. So that's another thing we could propose if those groups would be interested in participating. The only hesitation that I had is that it feels a little weird to like designate one person to represent a whole community. Like I identify as Latina, but I do not represent the entire Latino community. And so I think that there's potential problems to that, but curious if other folks have feedback related to those options. It's an awfully quiet group tonight.
Hello, this is Marlon.
Hey, Marlon.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right, good. I do hear what you're saying, Marcia. I am kind of hesitant. Well, I don't mind if we're going to have one person speaking for that community, long as we're making it clear that this person is speaking from their own like their own individual view on things. I do like the idea of having a panel, but if we're talking about having these spaces in this space, we only have an hour and a half, it seems like. And I feel like that's going to take up a lot of time with the questions and everything like that. So I don't know how much work we'll be able to get to. And depending on what's shared, we might have to make space for whatever comes out of that space. If that makes any sense? Like, something deep might come out of that space, and we're going to need room and time to unpack that. If so, I'm down for a panel. I'm also even down for the individual for whatever, because if you're trying to do a panel, you have to be able to get as many people as you can, and that's additional work. My suggestion is if we're going to be trying to create space for more community voice, that we add an additional 30 minutes to the time. But I also want to keep in mind how much time you just mentioned that you guys are putting into this work as well. So that's my 2 cents.
That's helpful feedback. I personally have thought, I've thought that the time has worked well. I felt like that time worked for, I don't think that we went over, but definitely, as Barb mentioned, to be trauma informed, we definitely want to give that space, and that, we can facilitate that process. I do think though, like if we're going to do a panel, that we just couldn't do it every month. I mean, I personally can't do it every month. I just think it's just a lot. It's a lot to have to give the space to unpack and then to have meaningful responses, like you said, Marlon. And so I would propose that if we are going to do that, that we can commit to doing that either quarterly or however often you all see fit. Lakiana, did you have something?
Yeah, I have to roll, but I just wanted to say this. I think panels can always be a part and should always be a part of what we do. What I was proposing with my original thought on it was not that we would like get a representative of the race and be like, hey, speak about the Black community, but like find someone from either an organization or whatever, like, right? Like just in the beginning of this meeting, like, hey, tonight's featured guest is so-and-so from whatever organization. And obviously like internally, we would make sure that they are representing different communities of Portland, and they would get to share something related to whatever it is that they're doing. We would just rotate that and have like a 15-minute space, 5 minutes to speak, and then 5 to 10 minutes for questions to kind of make sure that we're giving space to community to also talk about things, bring ideas into the group, share things that are going on. So that was just my idea around it. But I have to roll to another meeting that was kind of unplanned. So sorry about that, y'all, but appreciate being here.
Thank you. Yeah, the only thing that I would respond to in that is I think that we could do something like that if we could be more planful in like the outreach efforts, and maybe we could use some support with Theo and Claudia or Judith to help identify who those people are, and then set that so that we have folks lined up, and that might be helpful. So I think all of these are all really good options. I'd like to let's a sign up list could be cool if people want to come speak. I just want to make sure we're utilizing this space as effectively as possible, and that it's helpful for the community and for you all here tonight. And also that we're leaving. One of the other things is that we haven't left a lot of room to develop and review our recommendations. And I know that other subcommittees have done a really good job in doing that. And so moving us into the next topic, we're a little ahead of time, but if folks don't have a lot of feedback, in between these panels or spotlight sessions, we do need to have time to review some of our recommendations that we propose. So like tonight, we've left room to talk about the procedural justice policy recommendation that we developed last year. And so I think that we've got to figure out how to have a both and. Do other folks have thoughts? I'm going to really quick read Rodolfo's comment. He says he likes having one person come in at a time. It gives more time to have a deeper conversation around a topic. And just keep rotating the people, ensuring it keeps the space open to new perspectives. So that's a good suggestion. I'll write that down. Yeah, so I think, does anybody else have any thoughts that they want to add? Suggestions, criticisms? Let me have it.
Marcia, I enjoyed the panels, to be honest with you. I think, I realize it's a lot of work, and I agree with Marlon that you obviously can't do them as frequently as a quarter or something. But I do like the idea that more than one person from a, group gets to speak too, because to your point, that there is not just, no one person speaks for a group. And I think, your one last time showed that there were lots of different, ideas and things. I thought it was really a very, positive and beneficial exercise that you undertook. So I, easy for me to put the work on you, but, I just thought that was a really good way to do it, because you get, so I think you get a lot more people involved when you have the panel and open it up to everybody to, to share their experience. So that's my 2 cents from having watched these.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that feedback. I like the panels too. Amy, yeah.
Yeah, finally, I had to think about all of this, and I really, really enjoyed your last meeting where everyone kind of spoke from their heart. What I'm hearing, however, is we really should take something that's really important to a lot of people and just drive home solutions. Like, we should take some ideas and then brainstorm the how to, or how would you, what would it look like if things were different? Because right now I feel that I've heard enough till I'm choking on what people are saying, pretty much the same things. But what we're not really doing is taking major points and then bringing them back out looking for solutions. And that to me gives like importance to what the people are saying. Like, here's an example. When the gentleman said, I don't want to call police because I'm not sure what's going to happen to me. And it was a very scary moment for them. And that really hit home for me, because I have a lot of clients who feel the same way. That the approach, the knocking on the door, the even walking up on the sidewalk makes people really uncomfortable. And so I just feel that in this time where everybody's talking, we really need to work out solutions. So that's kind of my take on all this. Is I've heard enough panels, but then we walk away and nothing more is accomplished other than yakety yak, don't talk back. Sorry, but that's kind of where I'm at anymore. Is I want to focus on solutions, and whatever it takes, and whoever's got the answers, that's what I'd like to hear from. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think that that's important to know. And what I heard too in that is that we need solutions to the fear that
Yes.
exists in the community. And
Yes.
so that's really rooted in fear.
Yes.
And people respond to fear differently. We think about trauma and trauma responses to fear. Barb, go ahead.
No, go ahead, finish.
Oh, that was pretty much what I was going to say.
Oh. So I don't think it was this group that I told this story to. Stop me if it was. A month, 2 months ago, whatever, the street where I live was closed down for 2 blocks because the police were after somebody who they believe, and probably rightly so, had committed a murder. Amongst the problems that this caused, not that they didn't do their job, and I'm totally grateful that they did, but I don't really understand why things like their lights had to still be going on, once they already had the guy in handcuffs and in the car. And the reason why I noticed that was because I went over to talk to a sergeant or whoever was in charge just to get his card to give to our community person. And I realized that I did not do anything wrong, but standing there across from a cop who didn't have his hand on his gun or anything, but he was in combat uniform because that's who comes after those people. And the red and blue lights, my adrenaline was like totally pumping. I did not do anything wrong. So I think that it's important for everybody on both sides to understand what the feelings are like and what the issues are.
Thanks, Barb. I'm just taking notes. That's a really good point. And I think that again is aligned with like a trauma response, right? Everybody might feel differently or respond differently to flashing lights and the residual effects on the community at large, maybe even the folks that are not involved. Do others have comments or feedback that they'd like to add?
It looks like Zainab has her hand up.
I'm sorry, Zainab, I cannot see it. I can't see if there was one. I'm so sorry if I've missed you. Go ahead.
Thanks, Zainab. I appreciate Amy's response. I'm just trying to get at, for the racial equity subcommittee, what is the purpose of these talks that we're having? And I echo what Amy is saying. I'm not sure how long the racial equity subcommittee has been around, how many community meetings that has been held, hearing the voices from the community, and what has been the purpose of the committee, subcommittee, or also PCCEP in the general, in working towards solutions or resolutions or recommendations or partnerships or training, or I'm not sure. And so I'm hesitant, just like I think we talked about town hall meetings, and I'm just hesitant that, we continue to talk about things, listening to the community who may have their issues that they want to address. But what can PCCEP or what can a racial equity subcommittee do? How can they enforce things that are systemic, institutional? And so I just don't, it's the time that I'm thinking about, and everyone's time. Like you said, I almost hesitated to getting on this meeting today because there's been a lot of meetings, and I'm hearing the same things at these meetings. And so let's just keep in mind what is the purpose of it, and if there is a goal at the end, and so people can feel it, see it, and know that there is some change that has been recognized by both, these are both sides, by the community, whether it's the city of Portland, the PPB, people in the community. But thank you.
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. And that's part of the reason why we're here tonight, because I recognize that we have done, and I have not tracked. I think that's something that we could use some support in, is tracking like how often we're having these forums, how many we've had. I mean, we have had several, especially since the incident of George Floyd. And I think that it's important to, we developed a mission this time last year when I became the chair, because I similarly was confused at like what our mission was. And the mission, I'll just read it out loud for those of you who can't see the chat, but is to advance racial equity by giving voice to families of color and of low socioeconomic backgrounds, by identifying areas of discrimination that require change, trust, and the embedding of equity in various capacities. The different strategies we've used to do that is to host these forums that bring voices together. But as you mentioned, Zainab, and I've said it already before, is that we continue to bring folks together, but we don't have a solid plan for response, which is why I called for that work session, because it, something about the last 2 meetings, especially, and the Say Her Name event really resonated as a facilitator. It's challenging to bring folks together that, you know, when I don't have the power, like you mentioned, Zainab, like what is our authority to like actually invoke organizational change, and, you know, what's within our power, right? And so I thought it was important to take a step back for a moment and bring the city leadership together to talk about like what can we do, what can I allow community to expect as a facilitator, because it is uncomfortable to bring folks together and say like, thank you for your time, we're not going to do anything, or it's going to be business as usual. And so I was relieved at the response that we got. It's probably the first time ever I felt relieved after a conversation with the city in that capacity about their interest and acknowledgement to that concern. I think we have a lot of work to do, but I am hopeful, and that's why we're here talking today about what could this look like? What are some tangible things? So I see Jared's hand is up, and then I see Assistant Chief Davis. So go ahead, Jared.
Thank you, Marcy, and thanks for having this conversation. I just first wanted to mention that, you know, echo what everyone has said about the panel discussions. I believe that, you know, no one represents the whole group, but also having various perspectives from representatives of the group help reflect the complexity of many of the issues by sharing different experiences. Zainab's question is great, and it's one that's come up again and again, and I don't want to lose sight of the real example of change that has been put forth by this committee and responsively recognized by the police bureau and the procedural justice recommendation. So, you know, just stepping back to the 10,000 foot view, you know, PPB officers aren't out there rogue. They are doing their job pursuant to policy, and then they are trained to perform in compliance with that policy. And so to really get at the, you know, organizational behaviors and cultures, you know, doing something like recommending a procedural justice recommendation that the Bureau has, you know, to their credit, went out and crafted a detailed policy that when it gets implemented, and hopefully with the voice of this community and this committee, it will then be trained on regularly. And, you know, that doesn't mean that everyone complies perfectly, you know, the first year, but it's continually trained on. And so I think understanding how police officers do their job is essential to you all understanding how you can impact that. And, you know, I think this procedural justice idea that, you know, has come out of this committee and is now ready to, you know, go forth is just a perfect example of how, you know, through listening sessions and then work sessions to put it together. And the youth subcommittee has done this really well. You know, some of their meetings are not just hearing people grieve, it's taking what they've heard and crafting recommendations in terms of policy, like a restorative justice policy and the identification policy. But to me, that's really, you know, should be the focus of how you know, maybe every 4 months, you're going to do a panel presentation 1 month and do 2 work sessions to put together the real output, which is, you know, a policy that then you can work on the training for the policy. And, you know, so I think having that understanding of how officers do their job is pretty essential to what you guys should be doing in terms of your recommendations and putting into action what you hear from the community.
Thanks, Jared. I really appreciate that. I agree. Assistant Chief Davis. Oh, there you are.
Yeah, here I am.
Thanks for being here tonight.
No, absolutely. So I wonder, you know, I also hear and I kind of share the concern that, you know, on some of these issues, we've been talking about them for a really, really long time. And I'm sure that there is some benefit for some people to be able to come and just share their experiences. But is this maybe an opportunity for us to try to bring some police officers to these conversations? And, I wonder if that's something that we want to explore, because one of the things that I look at when we talk about making cultural change inside the organization is a lot of that is a matter of perspective. And all of our police officers have their own perspectives, but they don't necessarily see those perspectives as some of the people in the community. And that's something that, I certainly have a big interest in promoting is these, and it's a lot of work. It's a lot of hard work, because it means more when I bring, say, 5 or 6 officers to one of these conversations than if, I've got 800 and some sworn employees and another almost 300 non-sworn employees. And so, you can't get them all together at once, but those small group times where people are just able to see someone else's perspective. We have some things that we do, like the breaking barriers events that we were doing before COVID turned the world upside down. That's what happened at those. And that was the value of those, is it was just an informal opportunity for people to get together and just over a meal, have a discussion and expose our officers to some perspective they don't necessarily think of. And it might help some of our community members understand some of our police officers' perspectives. And police as a group aren't monolithic either, right? I mean, we're a very diverse organization with a lot of different points of view on some of these issues. But I actually see where, there's always the desire to come up with a policy or tell the police bureau to do X, Y, or Z, and there's value in that. But I would just, I guess my suggestion for what it's worth is, do we want to look at the value that we get even out of those informal interactions? I mean, I think of the value that I've gotten out of times where people in the community have we've been able to let each other's guard down a little bit and just have a real conversation about how they feel. That helps me. And then, maybe I've been able to help other people. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's just a thought. And I would be willing to try to get some people to come and be part of these conversations if it's helpful.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I've appreciated our conversations over the last couple of weeks. I think that building that trust is really important so that we can come together and do that work. Zainab, I see your hand. Go ahead.
I appreciate, I'm not sure if it's officer or Chris Davis, but.
This works. That's my name. That's what people call me.
Okay, thanks. I think it's important to, if it hasn't happened, to bring in those who are I guess I want to say the center of what we're supposed to be doing this work for, which is building a relationship with the Portland Police Bureau. But at the same time, there is a matter of people trusting in that space. And so there has to be a way that PCCEP or whoever brings, and people don't trust PCCEP because we have heard that too. People don't trust PPB. If there's someone that has to be a neutral party in this space, so that it can be facilitated in a way where dialogue can happen. I think it's important. I hope that this is a year where this is exercised, even if it's as a pilot or a way to start. But again, we have heard a lot. I'm from Portland. I grew up in Portland, and I know I saw a lot growing up. And we've heard a lot, we've seen a lot, and we continue to see. And it's not just in Portland, it's not just in, it's Oregon, it's not just in Oregon, it's not just, it's everywhere. And I hope that there is possibilities to connect those who have been harmed in a way where they can begin to build trust. Because, every, people come and go. I think people come and go in their jobs, people come and go in spaces, but sometimes in these institutions, people don't. They stay and they're there and they keep these ideologies that last, and they also spread. And so it's important for those who work within the PPB or the city to make sure that they handle things internally before it gets out, like before they come to these spaces, just to ensure that no additional harm is being done. If, for instance, I'm just put it out there, I think I've talked about this, but I remember coming to a PCCEP meeting, and I remember hearing Robert King at one of these meetings speaking on behalf of the city, the mayor. And when I looked, like as I'm looking this person up on the website, on the internet to find out more about this person, I learned about some of the things that he had done as an officer. And I was just kind of shocked, and I felt harmed because I didn't know who was in my space. And to me, I think it's important. I think it's important to acknowledge, yes, people have gone through things and they probably that hasn't been the best. Can you please, thank you. Haven't done the best, but they're trying. That's good. We understand that. But I appreciate Chris Davis' comments, and hopefully, having all sides, come together is important, but in some way it has to be done very intentionally, very strategically and thoughtfully at the same time. And not to say anything about you, Marcia or Lakiana, but I feel like you're also a community volunteer, and you don't want to take I don't feel like people want to take responsibility if there is any harm done in this space. So just keep that in mind. And I hope to see this and be a part of this as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Zainab. I think it is important to acknowledge the potential harm. And that's precisely why we need to hear this feedback, so we as a PCCEP larger group can work together to make sure that we're covering all bases and that we're following up. And that's why we didn't put the work in to do a big meeting this month, because that's been a screaming thing that continues to come up, even though they're perceived to be really great and informative, and they are, and there's potential harm that we might be missing. And so understanding where our blind spots are is really, really important. So I couldn't agree more, Zainab. Thank you. And thank you to the others who provided feedback. Do others have comments or thoughts? I'm gonna read the chat. So Rudy says that he would love to get officers in a sweat lodge or some kind of indigenous earth ceremony. What he's trying to say would be nice if they could meet the community where they're at. Sitting down to talk with people can be uncomfortable and intimidating if it's not the right setting. So please come meet us where we're at, but not as a spectator. And I think he had to leave us this evening, but we're hoping to have him participate in future meetings. So I think that that's an excellent point. Meeting people where they're at. That's a thing that has come up at several forums where breaking bread with officers is great and it works for some people. And one of the ongoing barriers for some communities is that it's really uncomfortable to meet with officers in uniform. And often there are officers in uniform there. Sometimes there's intentional spaces where there are not, but that seems to be an ongoing barrier at different community opportunities to meet with police in that way. So that's just something to note. But I love that point that Rudy just made about meeting communities where they're at. Get some officers. So Assistant Chief Davis, if we could get some officers in a sweat lodge, that would be awesome.
I will do my best. I'm in.
All right. Any other comments, feedbacks, concerns that you all want to share? Oh, Asana, I see your hand.
Thanks, Marcia. I think something that the city struggles generally with is meeting people where they're at. I see improvements in some bureaus depending on who's working there. So if PCCEP would be so kind, if you have ideas about how we can meet people where they're at, you know how to contact, please contact me and let me know. I really value your wisdom and experiences, you know, as we navigate this.
Thank you. Appreciate that invitation. Senna, could you add your email in the chat for folks that might have some ideas? And then I'm also going to, for those of you who, actually, I won't do that. I'm trying to find the procedural justice policy outline. I don't have it. Can somebody send that to me?
Are you talking about the one that the recommendation?
The recommendation I can get, but I'm trying to find the actual policy draft, and I wondered, I'm hoping that we can go over that today and talk about next steps, since we've got some folks here that can speak on that. But while we find that, any last call for thoughts, comments, feedback, concerns? All right. So we'll move on to our next agenda item. We are about 15 plus minutes ahead of schedule, so maybe this will be an early night. We're gonna go over the procedural justice recommendation, and I will get that and send that to the chat. Sorry for not having it up already. I only have, Theo, do you have that recommendation? I can't find it.
Let me pull it up.
Marcia, do you have the feedback from PPB?
I don't have feedback. I'm trying to find.
I think it was attached to the agenda, but let me look.
I didn't see it.
Theo, do you have a copy? What happened was the committee made a recommendation, and then the policy team created a draft policy, which is what you're supposed to be providing comments on. So, and Theo, I'm sure we sent it, you know, through you. So might you be able to pull up the proposed policy for them?
Yeah, I'm just looking. Do you want me to put the original recommendation in while I try to pull up the email?
Yeah, could you please? I had a copy of that draft recommendation, and I thought you had sent it to me, but I can't find it anywhere.
Yes, I'm looking for that too.
Sorry, y'all. So I'll just do a brief overview. This time last year, maybe last January, the Racial Equity Subcommittee developed a policy recommendation related to procedural justice. We thought it was, you know, consistent with the pillars of. I need to see this. I'm sorry, I'm a visual. I need to see the recommendation. So Thea, did you send that already?
I found the policy info from PPB. I'll put it in the chat. So that is their response.
Is it not on the website anymore?
It should still be in the website. It's going to be somewhere on the website, but we have some issues with tabs, as you know. Things get lost in the tabs. So we'll find it.
Someone finds it, can they share their screen?
I have a version of it up on my screen right now.
I found it if I can share it with you.
Assuming that there's only one version.
Yeah, go ahead, Claudia. Oh, sorry, AC Davis.
There should be.
Yes, there's only one draft so far.
I
You
put
want
it in
me
the
to
chat.
draft
I
it?
put the draft in the chat, Mary Claire.
Yeah, can you put it up on your screen? Yeah. No, that's the recommendation.
Yeah, we'll briefly go over the recommendation and we see that there's a draft policy. There you go. Okay. Sorry, y'all. We recommended that PPB implement a procedural justice policy. To make a long story short, to require officers to provide a statement during when they do stops. And so, and following certain steps by giving information up front and explaining the reason for the stop. So this was passed and adopted by Chief Resch back on March 5th, 2020. And then we have this draft policy that Ann put in the chat. And then if I can defer to Mary Claire, if you want to talk a little bit about this draft. I thought overall it looked good. But actually really quick before we start, I see Asena's hand is up.
I'll let Mary Claire speak first, but my office is working on a policy, on a directive with PPB that I think touches on this in part, and I'd be happy to speak on it, but I'll let PPB go first.
Oh, go ahead. I mean, basically, this is the result of the recommendation we received. Our policy team, took the recommendation that you gave and did their usual research into best practice and other, examples of procedural justice, directives that other jurisdictions might have. And this is basically what they've come up with. And so we're just awaiting your feedback, and then we'll proceed with the whole, policy, process, the directive process of posting it and going through to the point of enactment.
Mary Claire, is this the first policy that's been developed out of a PCCEP recommendation?
Let me think. Out of whole cloth, yes. I mean, this one was, a brand new policy. We probably have taken your comments in other directives, but this one is a whole new policy created, based on your recommendation.
Great, thank you.
We certainly had aspects of procedural justice, that, are incorporated throughout the Bureau through training and all that stuff. But this, is a specific, cut out directive to address it. The expectation.
Yeah, I think what's different is that it names that as soon as practically possible that the officer explain the reason for the contact and informed if they're able to leave. One of the things we hear often is that people are confused of whether or not they're free to leave, and because of the power dynamic, people feel obligated to stay or they respond defensively. There's probably a million reactions that officers on this call can, attest to, and that the officer then can explain the reason for the interaction, and doing that when people perceive themselves to be treated fairly, they're going to have a better, they're going to respond differently. Typically.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So that was the spirit behind this recommendation. That was important. I saw someone's hand up, but Anne, your hand was up.
Yes, I really like this. One thing I'm wondering, and I've seen this in other directives, it's hard to like have anything happen, you know, any measurable thing happen when things like members shall, whenever reasonable and practical. I worry about that, you know, that kind of wording, because I really want it to be like members will engage in the following.
And I understand that, but I'm going to ask DC Davis to speak to this too. But you have to understand that these policies have to address all the possible, you know, scenarios that an officer can face. And why we put that clause in there is that sometimes, you know, the circumstances may not allow it. It may be a, such a, volatile or whatever, that it may not be possible to, you know, to stay it right first. And Chris, I think you could probably, you know, talk a little bit about why we always have to have that kind of catch-all there, because.
Well, I get it. Excuse me. I don't mean to cut you off, Mary Claire. I get it, but it seems like it also gives people an option. Well, I didn't feel it was, you know, I would just like it to be a little more, we're always thinking of that first. I mean, that's my thought.
I always advise caution with adopting overly prescriptive police policies, just because so much police work is situational. And, you know, while I can certainly see where the recommendations were coming from. For example, I mean, I've got a spiel that I've been using for 27 years on traffic stops, and I don't get complaints on traffic stops because I figured out how to talk to people in a way that's natural. And I've actually found that when I try to use a script with people, I'm not really, it's a one size fits all approach. And one of the key things to learn in the art of doing this kind of work is accurately calculating the approach that you take with someone so you can make a connection with them. And so if we're overly prescriptive and we say you must cover all of these things, you know, some of these things make sense to all of us on this call, but I might encounter somebody out in the world who's like completely put off by why are you asking me what you can do to make me more comfortable? Just, you see what I mean? Because there's such a wide variety of people that we work with in such a wide variety of situations, or, you know, in emergency kind of situations, it's very difficult for us to be prescriptive. And that's why, you know, like I say, I mean, I have always, my philosophy of policy development has always been, in policing, unfortunately, we have to avoid a lot of overly prescriptive policies for stuff like human interaction, where it's really more art than science. And so, you know, where we've tried in the past, and I think we've still got some work to do to get at some of these issues we're trying to get to, is more in training. But I don't disagree, though, that some kind of policy prescription is good, but it just, I don't know, hopefully I'm expressing that well. I get kind of less articulate late in the day, so I apologize, but it is really hard to draw up a policy to sort of script what at its essence is going to end up being an interaction between two human beings in a situation all of us on this call can't forecast a lot of the time, because we just can't predict every situation somebody's going to be in.
I appreciate that feedback. I think that that just goes into the acknowledgement of like policy in practice and real life stuff. And so being able to work through that and talk through that is important. And the purpose of this policy, for instance, is not necessarily a script, but rather that you're getting the information out in some way, shape, or form. But you're not like reading off of, because that is weird. That's robotic and not relational. And we're talking about building trust, which is founded in relation. So I appreciate that. I see
Can I
a
just point
couple.
one? Can I use an example?
Sure, and then we'll go to Zainab.
Sure, and I'm sorry, but
No, go ahead.
if I mean, I can see this in a lot of situations that I might encounter somebody in, but what if I am on my way home and I encounter somebody on a bridge, which happens unfortunately a lot to our police officers, who's threatening their own lives. My objective, and having found myself in that situation once, was I'm trying to figure out what I've got to do to keep this person from doing something that I really, really hope that they don't do. And so if I tell my police officers, you've got even these elements that you've got to connect with, on all of your interactions with people, are they thinking about that, or are they in the moment with that person trying to make something better happen out of something that's not going so well? I don't know if that helps, but thank you.
No, I appreciate the context. I think others do as well. Zainab, go ahead.
Yes, and thank you. I as well, and I appreciate your experience as well, and your sharing of what, and I understand where Anna's coming from too. And so I'm really thinking that we shouldn't get so caught up into the context of it, because we've also seen that people interpret things differently as well. So even if you have the must, or someone's going to interpret it differently, it's in the training. It's also in recognizing who is violating these things. I know, maybe I don't know, but I hope that, PPB has a sense of internally who violates things, that they may need to have extra training or extra understanding of how to communicate well. I'm not sure if communications 101 is part of the training itself. However, it sounds like from you, I'm not sure, did you mention how many years? Is it Officer Davis? I'm sorry.
Just call me Chris. That's my name. I've been around a while. I've been doing this work for a little over 27 years.
So 27 years you have experience based on someone's coming in new, maybe a couple of years in, it might be different. And so I don't want us to get caught up into just that particular issue of whether it must be something. My thing is, if this recommendation was to go through, will it be adhered to? And how will you track that or measure that? And so, again, I hear everyone. I'm trying to hear everyone's point of view as well. But I do believe that having a good trust from the start may not be there, because if people already have in their mind, in their own ideology, that there isn't there, they will probably hear your wonderful communication as still something that they may be threatened by. And so I just want to put that out there. And hopefully we can get through this recommendation. Thanks.
Yeah, Barb, did you have anything to add? I have a couple thoughts about that too. Oh, you're muted.
Yes, but apparently I don't have a lot of dexterity in my fingers, so that was funny. I have like 4 things to say as we've been going through this, and I want everybody to know I do not mean any disrespect to anyone, because I don't
Oh, you muted. Barb, we can't hear you. Uh-oh. We can't hear you. We can't hear you.
I do get a fair amount of information over the scanner, but I think that I would have a better understanding of those kinds of situations if I had those two things happen before the pandemic or whatever. I can see
Barb,
those, like,
sorry to interrupt you. You cut out. You were talking, but there was no sound. So what were the two things? I think we heard everything but the two things you were
it's all
referencing.
Citizens Academy and the ride along. And I don't know which PCEP members have gotten to do that and which haven't, and what have you. But my understanding from at least one conversations I've had is that that's kind of transformative in some ways as far as a learning experience, I guess. And I'm trying to get more and more trust in the training division and how the training advisory council works and how they can be involved in they are involved in these kinds of things. Finally, I think the most important thing in that directive is the very last point. And I don't see it on my screen, but it basically says, consider that the person that you are dealing with. Do you want to read it, Chris?
Yes, it says, under other member actions and considerations when practicable, members shall consider an individual's lack of compliance may be attributed to factors that include, not limited to, a medical condition, mental impairment, a developmental disability, physical limitations, a language barrier, drug or alcohol impairment, and or a mental health crisis. And that is a sound piece of policy right there, in my opinion.
Okay, that's just, those are my comments, and I get to be a community member, so that's cool.
Yeah, I think those are really great. That's a really great point. And that's where the word practicable comes in, right? It's like, that's like Chris said, these things are situational and people have to adapt. Well, I also hear what Anne's saying and what Zainab is saying is that, it seems like, and I'll just say this, in policies, there always tends to be a loophole for those who, interpret practicality might be different for me than it is for any of you. So what's outside of this policy, which I think is overall really good, as it is, as we're building trust and accountability within PPB and giving feedback and hearing people's testimonies about the impacts of policies and outcomes of police work, that there's something in place that says, hey, who are the officers who struggle with the spirit of this policy, which is, connecting with individuals and being procedurally just, making sure they're making that connection and giving them and adhering to their rights, while also addressing their immediate needs as they come up. And so, again, it's like the spirit of the policy and then the actual policy, and like, how is it implemented in real life, policy and practice? Like, how does this play out? And then for the people who are not doing so great, what is the PPB going to do? And being transparent and like working with those individuals who are struggling or refusing or whatever it is to be procedurally just.
That was a great sum up.
Thanks. I was just going to say, before I couldn't unmute myself either, we have about 7 minutes left. So I just want to, hear any last thoughts and see what people think about approving. Zainab, I see your hand. Go ahead.
I had a question. I'm trying to look at my both screens and all the screens are open, and I had a question about, it says process. We recommend the PPB policy team collaborate with PCCEP members to create a first draft of the policy, after which the PCCEP will engage the community via the Racial Equity Subcommittee, and the PPB will engage the community via its established universal review process. The PCCEP welcomes participation by PPA representatives in the collaborative process. One, has it ever happened before, Marcia, or anyone on the community? Has any type of process like this happened through any of the other recommendations that provided PBB policy team to collaborate with PCCEP? And it also, how likely, if this was to be recommended, Assistant Chief Davis, with this type of recommendation be something that PPB would want to engage in? That's my question.
I think it's entirely likely that we will end up with something like what's recommended in a policy. I think we're most of the way there. I can tell you that it's already something that we want to implement. We've been doing procedural justice work and in-service training for a while now. COVID has just destroyed our in-service training program, but we're starting to put it back together after all that happened last year. And but we've actually even integrated the principles of procedural justice into scenario training now. Where it used to be you go through a training scenario in service and all they grade you on is the tactics. And that teaches people that the solution to everything in police work is tactics. Well, it isn't about 97% of the time. Most of the time it's communications and just working with other people. And so we now, when you get evaluated after you perform a scenario, one of the things that you talk about is, how'd you give that person voice in that encounter? And we've actually designed scenarios so that you can make the scenario go horribly wrong, just depending on how you talk to the person, or you can talk your way out of it without a problem, and trying to reward that behavior, because that's how the street rewards you. I mean, that's actually very realistic. So yeah, we're very interested in this topic.
And, if I can follow up, DC Davis, Zinab, by the process, we meant that, it was the PCCEP's recommendation. We wrote it up and hopefully it met your needs and expectations. We have this, forum to talk about because this subcommittee decided to take it on, but we've also received some feedback from the youth subcommittee and they were pleased with it. So, if in fact you want, your comments are that you're satisfied or what have you, then we will start the larger process of which is standard on all our policy creations and revisions, which is to post it for greater public comment. So it goes up on the website with notices to, the public that it is up there for people to look at and give other comments other than PCCEP. Now it would be open to anybody in the community. Then it comes down off that universal review. We look at the comments we've received and see whether, there's, positive additions to it. And we would work with PCCEP if we were to, make any significant changes to what the draft that we've both, worked on here tonight. Then once we've agreed to what we think would be the final draft, it goes up onto the website again for another, what we call second universal review, where the public again gets to comment on the final version. So we put up the first one that came up. There might be some changes after we've received, other community comments, but the one that goes up for second review is what our proposal is for the final draft. And we leave it open for 30 days to give people the opportunity, as well as PCCEP again, to comment. And then once that universal period is over, if there's no other changes, then the policy would be enacted by the Bureau. The chief would sign off on it. It is then posted in, what we call our learning management system, and every member is required to read and acknowledge and take a knowledge test on the directive. So it's not, something, they're all, required. We keep track of who does read and acknowledge that they have, are aware of the policy, and, they take a little knowledge check, and then 30 days after it's put up for that review process, it actually goes into effect. So that's the process we have for all of our directives. And that's what it was referred to in that note that you mentioned.
Thank you for that explanation. I think that's really helpful. We are at time, so I want to honor people's time. The one last comment I would make to that is I think that sounds really good. But back to Zainab's point is once that policy is enacted, I'd be curious to hear from the Bureau is like how they're going to measure its effectiveness. Like, are you tracking, is the community perceiving police to, act more fairly in the community? And so that can be another conversation for another time. But I think that sounds good.
Great.
All right, all. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Next time. Have a good night, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thanks, everybody.